I'll ask it again. A revised target of 2015 for adopting the single currency, the euro, has been abandoned. You've indicated 2020 might be the more likely time frame. Is what you're really saying a wait and see just how healthy the eurozone is down the block, on the track?
I think that both parts should be better prepared. First of all, I'm referring to my country, to Romania. We must be absolutely prepared to join the eurozone in terms of economic figures, inflation, the labor force. We are following a little bit the cautious way that Poland, which is much more advanced than Romania in structural reforms, is following. So we want to be well prepared and competitive when we will join the eurozone, and I think that that's a realistic target, 2018, 2020. Second, of course, like all the eurozone countries, but even the other countries, we are expecting to see that all the measures have been taken to strengthen the eurozone and to make it strong again, and to take all the regulation. I think that the eurozone does not need another weak player, so that's why first of all we must prepare ourselves, and then but the political commitment is to join the eurozone, and I think that will be in the benefit of Romania, but also the rest of the countries in the European Union.
Have you been scared off by some of those weak eurozone countries, the likes of Portugal, Greece, Cyprus, Ireland, which all had high hopes of economic integration, but they've now seen just how inflexible having a common currency can be?
To be very honest, also Romania not being in the eurozone, we passed a very difficult crisis, economic and financial crisis, 2009-2010. We were helped by the IMF and the European Commission and the World Bank. Even right now we are under an agreement, but right now it's a precautionary agreement. We do not take loans anymore. We are just agreeing on the structural reforms and the deficits and all the macroeconomic figures. So it was difficult even for us, not only for the eurozone countries. And I think that we have all learned our lessons from the previous years and the crises that have involved some eurozone countries, but even countries like Romania, which were not in the eurozone.
You have this €4 billion loan with the EU and the IMF to shield against market forces. Under what circumstances would you tap that loan? What would make you use that?
No, it's just it's a sort of buffer that we might access in the worst case scenario of a huge world financial crisis. It's not going to be the case, because just to give you some figures, examples, we started from a 7% deficit, and the interest of our national bonds to 7. Right now we are a deficit of 2.5, and on all the international markets we can issue bonds with less than 4%. So we have proved that we can be stable, and right now we are just paying back the loan that we took in 2009.
Critics say the pace of privatisation has been too slow. You've had some success with the sale of Romgaz on the stock exchange in London, but how much work do you need to do to continue the pace of asset sales?
I also say that it was too slow, the pace. That's why I was this morning in London to personally assist to one of the most successful IPOs, the Romgaz, the national gas company. But that has simply followed some other successful IPOs with Transgaz and Nuclear Electrica, the nuclear energy producers, and is going to be followed by another 2 or 3 big companies which will become public, will involve private capital. It's Hydroelectrica, which is the largest, the biggest energy producers in Romania. So I'm very committed to keep the schedule, not to postpone anymore this privatization, because I think that this is in the favor of the country and the companies, and having more transparent, more professional management, and more capital coming to these companies will also create economic growth and new jobs and investments in the national market.
I can't help but imagine there's been a significant shift in the investors' sentiment and appetite in the last couple of years. Are you seeing that when you go on a roadshow and you pitch Romania to private equity investors or stock market listed people who are chasing a stock market listing?
It has been a radical change, because in 2009, 2010, I think we were absolutely out of the markets, as long as the IMF and the European Commission agreed to help us. Right now, with all our government bonds, the oversubscriptions are 5 times more, and with the Rome gas, which was listed today, it was again 4 or 5 times oversubscribed. So it's a very good momentum. I'm very aware that it will not last forever. So we just have to prove in the future that we remain committed to privatize, to make structural reform, to have a stable political first and then economic environment.
There are a lot of critics out there who say the pace of addressing corruption isn't fast enough as well. This is still something your country needs to tackle, despite the fact you've had some success in weeding out corruption. What's the next step that you need to take to prove that there's integrity around the Romanian system?
I think that a lot of improvements have been done in this area, but are not always going to be obvious, because accusation of political corruption, it's a natural tool in our political stage. All politicians accuse their opponents of this, but the institutions have improved. They are independent, they are effective, and there have been a lot of cases of convicted persons, and this is in one hand. The other hand, which I am focused to improve, is to make all the public procedures, first of all the public procurements, even more transparent. We have been working for a system which is going to be handled by the National Integrity Agency in order to find the conflict of interest as soon as possible in the process, and to have most of all the public procurements on the electronic system in order to make it more transparent. I think that transparency will help even more than just prosecuting some people and putting them in jail. It will prevent the corruption and the conflict of interest. And I'm a former prosecutor, but I still believe that preventing, it's always cheaper and more effective than just punishing.
Let's talk about the economic revival after some rough water a couple of years ago, post-financial crisis. Mid-year, you cited an improved export demand story when raising the growth forecast to 1.9% for this year. How would you describe the backdrop right now?
I think that it's even better than I thought, because we began this year with a forecast of 1.6 economic growth, and we will finish the year with 2.2. It's an assessment which has been confirmed by all the the European Commission and the IMF. That was based on 3 important engines. First was the energy, the sector which we have reformed the most, and that's why even the companies which are now listed on the London Stock Exchange are so well appreciated, because we have done important things. Then it was the agriculture. Agriculture is still an important engine for Romania, with a huge land available for agriculture. We have succeeded to better use the incentives, but also the direct payments from the European Commission, and it was another engine of growth. And the third one, it was the radical change in what was the curse of Romania, not being able to use the European funds. Last year, when I took office in May, after 5 years of being member of the European Union, we were at 7 rate absorption of the European funds. After 1 year, we are over 25, we are closing 30%. That means, in clear figures, almost 3 billion euros non-refundable money coming to Romania, and another 5 billion 2014 that will come to Romania. So based on these 3, and then also a clear improvement in the automotive sector, that's why we had a strong and sustainable growth in 2013, and we can be optimistic for 2014. Because I mentioned the automotive sector, I am absolutely aware that this is based on one hand a very skillful and trained workforce, but also a cheap labor force. So that will be one challenge, to keep the balance between being competitive and of course the requirements of the trade unions. But I think that I'm a social democrat, but I live in the 21st century, and I keep trying to explain to all the society that we must be competitive if we want to develop ourselves and to have more money for the social programs. So it's first to be competitive, to remain competitive, and then of course we will have more money.
If you have this issue of competitiveness front and centre, how on earth do you introduce a minimum wage next year?
No, we have a minimum wage already. We will just increase it with 10 euros per month. So the minimum wage will be next year 200 euros per month, which is still, I think, maybe Bulgaria has a lower one. It's an absolutely sustainable one. I think all the big companies, they are paying more than 200 euros wages per month. It was just a way to fight against tax evasion on some specific areas where people were paid without being the taxes that had to be paid. But 200 euros per month, it's still a low wage. Of course, makes us competitive, but also it's a problem for the consumption growth.
Inflation was sticky until recently, near 4%. It seems to have stabilised just below 2%.
Yes, it's a very low inflation.
Is it stable though if you're going to lift the minimum wage?
Yes, it is, and of course inflation is a very good news for people having credits to the banks, but it's not such a good news for exporters. So we will try to keep it to a normal and sustainable level around 3%. This year was 2%, and that might affect the competitiveness of our exportations.
One of the issues with the minimum wage and also lifting the rate is that it brings less flexibility to the workforce, and you're still grappling with the fairly high youth unemployment rate. So how do you tackle these dual challenges?
We have promoted a program, and which I hope is going to be proved to be successful, that gives to all the companies hiring people under 25 and over 55, because we have another social program with people over 55 which has no jobs. So they will have exceptions from all the taxes, and they will have incentives to hire people. We also have a very flexible legislation regarding the part-time contracts, and that's why we are confronted, like all the European countries, with the youth unemployment, but not so much affected like more developed countries. Rather for the Romanian young people, it's another challenge. It's their possibility to move abroad, to work in the Western European countries or the United States, especially in the IT industry, being better paid than in Romania, and that's a huge loss for us. This brain drain, it's something that we have tried to stop, giving a lot of incentives, especially to the IT industry.
Many are worried that the floodgates are just about to open, particularly as Romanians gain full access to the UK employment market in a couple of months. Do you expect Romanians to inundate the UK job market?
No, absolutely not, because I have followed a lot of independent surveys. This is not about media subjects or political fights. It's about being reasonable. So we are not going to see any radical increase of Romanians or Bulgarians coming to the UK labor market. The big, let's call it, migration of the labor force has been 2007, 2008, and most of the Romanians they oriented to Spain and Italy because of the language, the mentality, the culture that have united us. I think that that the Romanians who will go abroad will be well trained and well trained and very skillful person, and we will lose some dynamic part of our doctors, for example, or IT engineers. But it's not going to be a radical change, not anymore.
No one's ever worried about the doctors and the engineers. It's always the unskilled that people are concerned about. The Foreign Office says there's really no reliable statistics
I think
this.
I think it's a wrong perception. I think it's a wrong perception because right now the untrained and unskilled person they can find maybe easier jobs in Romania, but for the doctors and the IT engineers, it's a matter of the wages that they have, and we are not yet able to pay the good wages especially for the health system, and the offers from UK or some other Western European countries are very difficult to compete with.
Are you worried about the negative image though, because the headlines have been awash with this sort of immigration message, and at what point is there going to be a backlash against Romania at a time when you're trying to sell a very positive country image?
Of course I'm worried, and I'm trying to, as a government, through the embassy, through all our people, to present the good parts, the positive facts. To be very honest, we have been helped. Prince Charles is the best promoter of Romania because he has a house in Transylvania and he's promoting our country, and a lot of many other personalities from the UK, they are presenting the good parts of Romania in the region. But it's a never-ending fight, and we have to present the good parts and to assume the bad ones and to try to improve it. It's not just being angry, it's not going to solve the issue.
Let's pivot and talk about some of the central bank stimulus, because Mario Draghi took further action to lower interest rates. Are there any repercussions for your country from the extra stimulus flowing through the region?
Even the Romanian central bank decreased the rate of interest to 4%, which is a historic low for our 24 years of democracy. But I think that not only Romania, but the whole Europe is still confronted with the same problem, the lack of credit. The banks are much more reluctant to give credits. A lot of them, they are trying to clean up their bad loans. And right now it's very difficult, especially for the private sector in Romania, to have access to the banking credits. That's why we are trying to use the inflow of the European funds, and also the government is not using at all the national banking system for the government bonds. We are going on the United States market or some other international markets in order to leave all the cash credit for the private sector, but the recovery is still not yet enough.
Prime ministers across the Eurozone are in some ways being forced to put hand on heart and pledge support behind many of the major banks. How would you describe the health of your banks in Romania?
It's a joke that I always use when it comes about the Romanian banking system, is that the Romanian government has no problem with the Romanian banking system because we do not have Romanian banks. Most 80% of the banks working in Romania, they are owned by the Eurozone banks. It's Austrian, French, German, and the Italian banks. We were lucky as a government. We did not need to give any cash money for our banks because our banks has been very stable. But this is also the merit of the central bank, which has handled very well the situation. But we still need more resources coming from from the owners of the Romanian banks, and here we are still negotiating with them to leave the money in the country, not to take it back in their countries.
What you're alluding to here is a reliance on the global banking system. So I wonder how concerned you are about outflows from emerging markets once the US Federal Reserve starts its tapering program of quantitative easing.
We are prepared for that. I mean, the central bank is prepared first of all, but also the government.
How are you prepared, and how is the central bank prepared?
They have already applied the harshest regulation. They are some steps in front of many other countries, and I think that, and in the end, this is the only message that I can give, is that the Romanian banking system is a strong one, and it's going to resist to any unpredictable events.
What about the currency, though?
No, based on the last year experience with such a low unexpected inflation, it seems that that the currency, Romanian currency, will resist, and we will keep all our obligation in order to fulfill the standards for joining the euro in several years.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.